As you can hear, I treated myself to a little bit of effects. 99% of the playing I do on this channel is just dry because it's guitar straight into amp. If the amp has tremolo, if the amp has reverb, I test it. But this is a 2003 limited edition hand-wired AC30 that I made much more like a JMI example of, and it no longer has reverb, and I didn't use the tremolo built into it. And both because it's pretty and because you can hear tuning things differently when there's an atmosphere versus dry, and I'll show you dry as well. I'm going through a flashback X4 for a little bit of slightly modulated delay, and I had a Strymon Flint set to a plate reverb, and here's all that without all that. And I've gotten this guitar set up to the point where I can use the vibrato bar, the Maestro Vibrola, for very gentle shimmers and slight sweeps, kind of Bigsby-esque, and the whole thing stays in tune. And that's quite a thing. I first got this guitar in November of 2020, and I did my first review on it, and I showed quite a process of experimenting over the coming months with different approaches to the bridge and the saddles. And I have arrived at a point where it works well enough for me. I don't think this system is ever going to do dive bombs like you get with a good Strat or similar, or Floyd's, whatever. But just for adding that shimmer, it's quite nice. And the guitar sounds very different than a Fender or similar, which has, a Floyd or whatever. And it sounds differently than, say a Gretsch with a Bigsby. It's a nice thing. And when it's out of the way, it's quite out of the way, and I can treat it just like it's a stop tail within reason, but it stays in tune and it sounds really good no matter what I do with it now. And I'm just tickled pink. So I'm going to describe some of the steps I got to get to this point, which were some missteps. I will say that I could have gone a different route with this and gone to a roller bridge. However, the roller bridges on the market tend to be Nashville style rather than Tune-o-matic style, and they don't look that great to me. Part of having a replica of an early 60s guitar is the look. For me at least, others will disagree. I did change one thing. I took off that very rough flathead screw here and put in a much more burnished Phillips stainless. Just felt better when my hand hit it. But other than that, you'd have to be very close to see that. But also I've experienced that roller saddles, that's a lot of added mass. It's a lot of new points of friction. Even if all the ball bearings are working well, it's just a lot more places where energy gets transferred. So I didn't even try that. I'm sure that would work as well once the bridge itself is fixed, as you'll see in this next insert. Okay, so here we have the Faber inserts, and you'll see more on those in just a bit. And these are domed saddles that I'll describe a bit later in the video. But this dome means that the bridge will return to zero better. This is the Faber non-locking ABR1 type bridge with nylon saddles. More on that in a bit, and why I think this does the trick is that while the string grooves kind of sort of catch the nylon a little bit, the entire bridge can move back and forth on this dome. And there's a pretty tight fit here between this stud and the opening here, the inner diameter of this bridge. So it doesn't move a lot. It's not rattling. It just moves forward a little bit when there's tension on this side, and then it moves back a little bit if necessary. But it wants to come to a zero point because these grooves kind of grab the saddles and move the whole thing together. And they don't want to slide on the saddle, so that groove doesn't want to go up one groove or back one groove. Just kind of moves the whole thing. And it rocks on these domes, and I have a little bit of 3-in-1 oil at that contact point. Now let me talk about the things that led me to this point. First of all, these old insert studs, there used to be metal inserts in the body. You see me take them out here. Well, you'll see them taken out in a second. They wobbled. So you had the bridge sitting up top here. Here's a bridge. And it wobbled on, so the bridge moved back and forth on top of the post. And then this moved back and forth in the insert. And that was two different points of movement, like a, flopping your wrist back and forth. I'll do it with the finger so it'll fit in the camera. So that is two different points. If that's one, if that's the top of the stud and that's the bottom of the stud, you don't want that to move and that to move. You just want one thing that the stud does not move, but the bridge on the stud rack moves back and forth like that. It's just a lot less mechanical friction, a lot fewer places for things to go wrong. So I first tried wrapping these with some Teflon plumber's tape to try to get them tight in the inserts, as you can see here. And that reduced it a little bit, but did not eliminate it, and it certainly didn't give it a good return to 0 point. So I took out the metal studs and put in some inserts that Faber sells, which go right into the body, and then you have a rigid post, just like you'd find in an old Gibson, which just has a 6x32 threaded stud in it. And at that point, the old, where's the Gibson saddle? The old Gibson saddle, that's the Faber. The old Gibson saddle, I'm going to use this because it is the right diameter. Move back and forth a little bit more than I wanted, and was grabbing the saddles a bit more, but it was still sitting on a flat wheel and it didn't have a return to 0. So I thought, well, I'll just eliminate that rocking entirely and get something with lubricated saddles. So I got this Tone Pros bridge, which locks to the saddles. Let's show you this one, the base side. But at that point, the bridge did not move when the strings, when the bar was used. But these nylon saddles that Tone Pro sells that are supposed to be lubricating and not grabbing the strings, they wore really fast. These notches were worn by the strings. B, they grooved deeply. There was no lubrication. So the strings would catch on these and slip forward and back, and it did not put me at a good point. The other two flaws with this, even if that tuning stability had been great, is with the Tone Pros, once it was locked in place, there was no tension on the thumb wheel, and the thumb wheels came loose and vibrated around. I mean, if everything else was working, I probably could have gotten some blue Loctite and fixed that, but that was an issue. The other issue was because of the way it pushes against the posts when you lock the Tone Pros, it pushes the whole thing off center, just slightly, just a little bit of movement there. And it was very difficult to intonate on this SG because Gibson placed these studs to begin with just slightly too far forward, too close to the neck. You look at this G-string saddle. It's got almost no travel left behind it. So if this string needed to go farther back, if the saddle needed to go farther back for best intonation, there's not a lot of room to movement or to move it there. And with the Tone Pros, it was just maxed out and it was a compromise. On the Les Paul I have, as you can see in just a second, they drilled these in slightly different locations, and there's much more of a range available, even with an ABR1 for the G saddle. Meanwhile, here on the Les Paul, the bridge is mounted in a much better location. Notice that there's still a gap here between the back of the bridge and the G saddle. So this is just a very slight different placement of this post right here, but it makes a huge amount of difference. So this one does have the Faber posts and the Faber locking bridge, by the way, which is really nice. But anyway, that was 3 strikes against the Tone Pros. These nylon saddles supposed to be lubricating, weren't particularly lubricating. They were wearing really fast. It was really hard to intonate. You can see I've got that G just slammed up against the back, and it wasn't quite there. And because of the way they lock, those thumb wheels were vibrating loose. So I briefly tried the Faber locking system, and again, just barely got there with the G string. And this, rather than pressing from one side of the stud, grabs the entire thing, and you end up with a very secure, wrong one, you end up with a very secure connection once that's locked in place. But it had the same problem in that, all right, the thumb wheels were no longer moving. There was still downward pressure on the thumb wheels, and the bridge wasn't moving at all, and the studs wasn't moving at all. But with these plated brass saddles, the strings were still grabbing a little bit, and tuning was not the best. That's where I was for a good long time because I liked the sound. But I decided I either needed to go to the roller bridge or I needed to go back to how it would have been in 63, 64. So I found these domed wheels, and I got the non-locking Faber bridge with these nylon saddles. And so the bridge moves just slightly when the bar does its thing, but it returns to 0 really well. And so things I do to sweeten that. Right here where the ball ends contact the rear plate here, where the strings are held, the anchors, I put a little 3-in-1 oil, not 3-in-1, what is it? Triflow, little tiniest bit of Triflow, right wherever that metal contacts that metal. And on the nut and on the nylon saddles, I use a little bit of nut sauce. You can also use pencil graphite. You can use, people have had good luck with Burt's Bees chapstick stuff. I should say lip balm. And I put a little bit of Triflow where this contacts this. This is the surface point between the domed wheel and that. And that all works really well. Now, there was one other thing I tried, which I'll show you next, which did not work out. One of the rabbit holes I went down with this thing is I had these Gibson Revolution tuners on here, and they worked fantastically. But they, let me get the other one that goes on the correct side. They did not aesthetically make me very happy in that the look just wasn't quite what I would love. And you know, when you have a guitar like this, you want the look matters too. It's just that thick part here compared to the very slender on the actual Gibson style. And on the back of the headstock, looking at these kind of bugged me. You know, the thumb wheels. But they worked really well, and they're lightweight. There's nothing wrong with them except aesthetically I wasn't knocked out. The issue is the recent non-historic Gibsons have a 10mm hole for the bushings to go through rather than the 6mm. So I got these Gotos, which are great, and I got these adapters, these 6mm to 10mm flanged adapters to cover up the imprint that the old bushings had made in the front of the guitar. And I have them also on the Les Paul that I have. And on the Les Paul, there's no issue whatsoever. For whatever reason, on these, particularly on the low E string, there's not enough space between the hole and the top of that flange to do a wind beneath. And if I do the wrap I usually do on the E string, it's 1 over and 1 or 1.5 under. And so I just could not do that. And I thought, well, let me try wrapping up, which can be good with the Gibson. Keeps the string angle behind the nut a little less severe. And so I wound these all up. And it works after a fashion, but it's getting string slippage because there's nothing pressing these down. And so as you bend a string or use the bar, it wants to go up on the post. It does not work. So until I can find, what's the best way to put this? Goto makes locking tuners called the HAP-M that look just like this, but they are locking. And I have them on one of my Strats, and I have them on my Tele. But they're only sold through Goto Japan, and there's a lot of fumbling through Japanese websites to get them. And when you finally figure out the ones that you want, they're like $140 and there's shipping and all that fun stuff. So maybe somewhere down the line, I will do that. I think the locking makes a lot of sense with the vibrato, but I'm going to put these Goto Revolutions back on because they really do work, and there's no issue with the angle, and there's no issue with the binding. And this experiment in getting it vintage correct aesthetically was a failure, and that's part of the process. You know, I enjoy the journey in all these things, and you know, I can sell these new Gotos, and take a minor loss, but you know, I get paid in experience and knowledge. By the time I'm done with this, I will know this guitar very, very well. And so I'm back to the Kluson Revolution locking tuners, which has the really nice behind the nut angle. And I don't have to worry about not being able to get wraps, and it fits the 10 millimeter holes in the peg head. I really wish Gibson had stayed with the 6 millimeter and used the good quality tuners. As I said in the first, I think the second or third review on this guitar, I've got a Gibson acoustic from '99, and it has tuners that say Gibson on the back of them, Gibson, custom Gibson. They're Kluson style. I think they were made by Goto. And those things have been great. And if those were on this guitar or the Les Paul, I would never have changed them. But on this guitar and the new Les Paul and all the non-custom shops, as far as I can tell, they're using these Ping tuners that go into a 10 millimeter a hole in the headstock. And they still say Gibson custom, but they're just crappy. The ratio is not good. There's a lot of slop. There's varying resistance as you turn them. And the Gotos, which I tried in here, were infinitely better. But because of the 10 millimeter hole, even with the adapter on this guitar, they just didn't work out. On the Les Paul, they did. So this one's back with the Kluson Revolution tuners, and I will just deal with the aesthetics. Anyway, back to hearing the thing. Now, as to what I did here, what I ended up with, I kept the very, very nice Faber posts that go straight into the body, so that post is not moving. And then I took a cue from the original 63-ish SGs and similar Gibsons, which had the Maestro at that time. And I have a non-locking bridge, but one that fits quite nicely on the post. This is the Faber, non-locking. And then I have these domed wheels, which I probably will put in an insert here as well for you. And what the point of the domed wheels and the non-locked bridge is that when the bridge rocks forward, the bridge kind of rocks forward on that dome, and then it comes back. And because there's not a flat surface on a flat surface, the point of contact is actually fairly small. And I use a little bit of tri-flow in there. And it has a return to 0 point, which is pretty darn close. I had tried some other nylon saddles, as you already heard, and was not impressed with the wear of the Tone Pros nylon saddles. I had some other issues with that bridge as far as intonation and how it worked. I wanted a bridge that fit snugly, but had a little bit of movement. I went with these nylon saddles because it's period correct, and because they actually do grab the string just a little bit more than steel or brass. I did try some brass saddles, traditional saddles on this. And by the fact that the string grabs these nylons just a little bit, not as much as the Tone Pros saddle material, but just enough, it helps the bridge move forward and back. It kind of locks the string at the saddle. It doesn't want to slip forward or back. It wants to stay in its spot, and that helps with the return to 0. And, so a lot of this time and effort to get back to what they did in 63. Now, I'm going to edit this out if I already put this in the insert. I haven't scripted this. This was a very expensive way to go, even if I had known from day one that this was the way to go. I got these domed wheels, off Reverb. They're about $30. There's a company in Germany, Guitar or something, I'll put the link up, that sells them, but they're like $50 once you convert from euros to dollars, and then there's overseas shipping. And I didn't want to spend $60-something to see if it would work. I spent $30 to see if it would work. Still a lot of money for 2 pieces of metal, but not nearly as much. And then I found a company in England that takes the Faber non-locking. I think they also do the locking bridge, but the Faber Tune-o-matic ABR1 bridge, and makes nylon saddles that fit it. And these nylons seem to sound and behave very much like the old ones. They're slightly more translucent than the old ones, but most of the old ones I've seen are old. Maybe they started off this color. I don't know. But these aren't wearing as quickly. The Tone Pros, within a month of using them, they had deep grooves in them. The string was just eating into them, and Tone Pros promise all this lubrication, and just that quality is not there. So I'm very happy with this. I'm not going to be using this for dive bombs. I'll probably rarely touch it, but at the end of a song or something, it can be nice to do a little bit of a and it doesn't have to be at the end of the song, because it will stay in tune. Now, here's a major 7th. So all that's very nice. It stays in tune very well, but I know that if I were to use it an awful lot between songs, I would need to sweeten the tuning with the tuner. But my strats are set up really well, and they stay in tune really well for non-locking bridges. They still need a bit of sweetening between songs if I were playing live. One oddity of this bar, which is kind of strange to me given how much guitarists of the time this was designed would have been seated, you can only use it a little bit when seated. just the nature of it. The fulcrum needs farther to go. So standing, you can do a little more stuff. You can hear right there, it went a little bit out. Let me take off the delay. So big bends like that, maybe when the strings have got a little more stretch in them. Let's see, A's good. The D went quite a bit sharp. And the G went a little bit flat. The B went a little bit flat. The E went a little, stayed in. And the low E stayed in. So I think it's that D going so sharp, which threw everything else off. So I'm gonna do a big bend on that D string. Now it's a little bit flat. Part of it is these are still relatively new strings. They're about a day old. In my experience with finicky strats, I don't have to do it on the two I have now, but I've certainly had to do it in the past. Sometimes if a string goes sharp, you just do a little quick bend on it, it goes right back. And I think once the strings aren't quite so new and they got the rest of their stretch out of them, it'll probably be good. But again, that was a big, silly thing to do that this guitar is not good at. For this, the tuning stability is really nice. I mean, I could gig with this and not worry about it as long as I don't try to do Van Halen or Hendrix things with this. A note on the strings on this guitar, I have been transitioning all my guitars to the D'Addario NY-XLs. There's a lot of stuff talking about strings, which tends to be marketing hype, and I certainly didn't take some of the claims about these XLs too seriously. But one of the things that they claim is that the strings, you don't have to stretch them as much. They come to their final tension faster and want to stay there. And in my experience on this guitar, the Les Paul, and one of the Strats, that's actually been the case. It's much faster to get all the stretch out and be ready to go. And they seem to stay a little bit fresher, a little bit more than standard NYs. Pardon me, standard XLs. So I think I'll be transitioning to these. This is not an endorsement. I don't get paid. I mean, I'd be glad to take some money. Always like money, but I would not take money on something before I gave an opinion on it. They seem to be better. This seems to be a nice change. I like the bounce. These are 10 through 46, nothing special. But I'm really pleased with how this guitar has ended up. It's something that I worried at times that I would never, ever be able to use because there's just so many parts of the physics working against it. But this compromise has worked out really well for me. Yeah, your mileage may vary. Most guys are going to get the hardtail version of an SG anyway. But aside from liking the look, and now having the ability to actually use the Vibrola for, actual Vibrola-ing, this sounds different than a standard stop tailpiece. This is a different sound, and a lot of the guys that I've always loved had this. George Harrison from '66 to about '68, Pete Ham with Badfinger. After that, the same guitar. Crucially, Alex Lifeson had this tailpiece on his is it 355? Or 335, I think it's a 355. And Freddie King had this tailpiece. I cannot play like Freddie King ever, though I would love to. What a great touch. I can do some Lifeson stuff, not Lifeson stuff. I can't talk. I can do some lyrics from time to time, though I'm never going to be at his level. Truly a great guitarist. And I can do the George Harrison stuff, and that's not to put down George. He became quite a great guitarist. But the thing about George Harrison, like Peter Buck, to me, is not that it was technically difficult, but that the part, was thought of. He came up with unusual parts, great voicings, great melodic lines, a real personality there. And it doesn't matter if it's easy to do, it's hard to think of the first time. And that's why some greats are greats, even though I can play everything that they play, even on one cup of coffee. And, there are a lot of players out there whom I will not mention who play on infinitely more technical levels than some of my heroes. And I just I've never had any interest in chasing that because the passion is not there. And that's not, from the soul, man. I love Larry Carlton. His stuff is very technically adept, and the theory and harmony he's using is fantastic. Eric Johnson, I don't chase him, but I appreciate what he does. This is not a punk thing. This is what speaks to me, and what speaks to me, what speaks to you can be different things as long as we enjoy that music has such treasures in it.